And I think that's one of the things that we're really interested in right now is what are the new ways that people can turn something that might have been a hobby 5 years ago into a business. I think as somebody who started as a blogger in 2001 and was told that I was crazy to start a blog as a business, that it was a fool's errand and that there was no money in it. I'm really encouraged when there are new ways and better ways for people to be able to support themselves and to throw themselves into the thing that they're passionate about.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the segment where we're actually featuring what we think are some of the best venture investors in the media industry globally. And I'm super excited to be here with Peter. Peter is the partner at Betaworks Ventures. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
The reason why we're having this interview and why I reached out is a handful of reasons. One, Betaworks, the things that you guys are doing, both as a venture team, your portfolio that you built, the other projects that you have on the side is really impressive, especially for the portfolio companies you have that not only exited, but they're currently still active. Really impressive, pretty diverse investments across the media landscape. And I want to get into that. Second, you have a really impressive background. You've been in the media industry for a while now, and I won't steal your thunder. I'll let you give us a brief background on yourself as well. But we looked at well over, I think, 60 plus venture investment firms active in the media industry. And you guys are by far, I think, one of the most impressive. So again, thanks for doing this. Maybe just to start off, we'll just jump right into Betaworks Ventures. Who is Betaworks Ventures?
So Betaworks Ventures, we are a pre-seed and seed stage fund based in New York and San Francisco. So I'm in San Francisco. My two partners, Matt and John, are in New York, and we invest in what we describe as the future of how we live, work, and play online. So we're really interested in things that happen on the internet, things that are native to the internet. When Betaworks started 14 years ago as a studio, which actually incubated and spun out new businesses, that was more of a novelty, I think, the idea of being an internet-focused builder. But we started Betaworks Ventures about 5 years ago in 2016 as a seed fund. Like, we spun it out of the original Betaworks, which, as I mentioned, was a studio, which did have some history as an investor as well, but never had a proper fund. But some of the investments that they did out of the studio entity were first investor in Tumblr, major shareholder in Twitter via, I think, 4 companies that were either built or invested in by Betaworks, acquired by Twitter, investor in Medium, investor in Kickstarter, investor in Venmo, investor in Everlane, investor in GroupMe. So it did phenomenally well investing in I think, what we think of the intersection of the transition to new forms of computing and how we are engaging with each other with and through computers and technology, and a real strong emphasis on new platforms and interfaces and new ways that we're communicating and connecting. And to go back 14, 15 years ago, that was social, that was real-time data, that was the rise of mobile. Now we think of it as social gaming, we think about spatial computing, we think about the future of audio, which includes podcasting, but obviously now includes real-time products like Clubhouse. We think about the future of communities and collaboration and how that intersects with the different ways that we're working together online right now. And it always involves like things that don't quite fit into any neat box, or a new category which we're thinking through, like synthetic reality, where we're investing in things like virtual celebrities and influencers, new types of machine learning based technologies which are democratizing how content is created and how CGI is made. And so we're really interested in the moment when the user meets the technology, the user meets the interface, and when new things can be created. We're not deep tech investors. We're not investing in fintech, and we're not investing in we're investing in things that we think where people are making really interesting new products, which are changing the way that people are creating, communicating, connecting.
I actually wanted to dive in a little bit on that point that you mentioned. I mean, you talk about really focus. I mean, you're zeroing in on the consumer experiences. You're also looking at the frontier technologies, looking at your portfolio. It's a combination of audio, social networks, gaming, media, content, brands. It's a mix of a lot of different things. And when I look at the media industry specifically, but I feel like media tends to blend with consumer, it's so vast. And you kind of highlighted a little bit, but how do you really filter this down?
It's funny because there was a time where we thought about, we should describe ourselves as being a media venture fund. But I think that one of the challenges is that media can be defined in such a narrow way that it didn't really encompass a lot of the things that we were seeing as the future of media. Giphy, for example, a company that was built at Betaworks, the original Betaworks, was a new form of media, the GIF, and about communicating through GIFs, and became in a way a new sort of media company. So we take a very broad definition to it. It's not just social media. It's really about expressiveness and creativity in all the different ways it can manifest. I think broadly speaking, we're really interested in the democratization of these things, but we're also investing in tools which are trying to mitigate some of the negative externalities which have come out of the internet with disinformation and people being misinformed by fake news, thinking about abuse online, privacy, things like that. So we take a very broad definition. I think what helps that all of us have had at the fund have had some experience in prior lives in this. My partner John was the CTO of AOL Time Warner 20 years ago. I myself I started off as a journalist and then I was one of the very first bloggers and then one of the first bloggers to become a blog entrepreneur, so to speak, and start a blogging business. I started actually a few of them and ended up running strategy for the media side of AOL after about 8 years ago after I sold my last company to them. And I think that we're intimately familiar with the challenges of media businesses and also the contours of these businesses and how they monetize the dependencies that a lot of more I call it traditional internet businesses have now with distributing content through social media and trying to figure out how to monetize, and the disintermediation that a lot of publishers now have where they're not doing direct ad sales anymore. They're working through ad networks, and the ad networks are aggregating their audience, and you might view the content on one site and then get served an ad on the platform that's cheaper later on. And so I think that we have a really intimate understanding of the nuances and challenges of these businesses. And so when we see things that are interesting or novel, it makes it easier for us to be able to jump on them and get excited about them. I'm not going to say we always get it right. We get it wrong a lot. But I think that we have a real curiosity about what's out there and what people are using. And fundamentally, all of us are people who are interested in the creative process ourselves.
I think that is a talent that's really hard to describe. Because looking at the media industry overall, it is based on all the other typically SaaS and enterprise services. It's the industry that has probably the highest closure ratios than any other industry. And you guys are going, I mean, you're bold. You're at the seed stage. You're at pre-seed stage for an industry I think it's really tough to play in. And it's going back off of what you just mentioned. You guys have a knack for looking at companies that really stand out to you. I mean, what is in the media world a company like? Is there certain aspects of a company that really stands out that gets your attention in that pre-seed, the seed stage? Because in media, it's tough early.
Yeah, it is tough. I would say I think that what we look for is one of the things we look at is do we worry that the ceiling will be too low for the business, where that it can grow to a certain stage, but there isn't something inherently scalable about the business where a lot of, again, I call them traditional internet media businesses, like Engadget, right? Like Engadget, the way Engadget grew was, we were part of Weblogs Inc., but the way Engadget grew itself was like, okay, we have to add more writers, and then we have to grow the pages, and then we have to create more content. And then if we start to max that out, we have to start a new blog and then hire new writers. And there's a sort of a cost that is inherent to the generation of the content, and then a pretty well understood model around how much you can monetize in terms of CPMs and page views and things like that. It was a very straightforward model, but it was very linear. There wasn't necessarily like a non-linear path to Weblogs Inc. suddenly being worth billions of dollars because we were able to tap into some sort of scalable, repeatable process like you are with a social media company. And so the things we look at are, what do we think are repeatable and scalable? What are the things that we think that might cause there to be a limit to how big this business can get? And sometimes it can be the size of the market, right? And the market can be, sometimes we get pitch companies that are trying to sell something to podcasting businesses, for example, or newspapers. And we're like, this is a great product. But I think if you got 100% you've got every newspaper in the country to use this, I think that you would struggle to make a lot of money here. And this isn't something that's unique to the media businesses. We see this. We got pitched something that was like a chatbot aimed at realtors. And just by way of example, is they were touting the fact that they had about, I think, 15% of the realtors in the country signed up, and they were making $100,000 a month. And so we're like doing the math in our heads. And we're like this is not going to be that big a business when they get to 100% of the market, and that either they misprice their product, or it's so cheap, or it's only getting such great penetration because it's cheap. And I think that when we think about media businesses, we think about what is that scalable aspect to it. And I think Giphy is a good example of something where nobody wanted to invest in it when it first came out. And there are all sorts of reasons to be skeptical about it. But what they were able to do is they were able to get Giphy via the API integrated into all these different social platforms, so that when you wanted to communicate via GIF, that GIF came via Giphy. Facebook, Twitter, everybody integrated with Giphy, and that was their distribution model. And it wasn't apparent at the time that was what was going to be the thing that they did, but it's the kind of thing that we look for in terms of the path to it being a big business. What is the path? Like, what does distribution look like? What is, we think of it as, what's the thing that's created and how is it created and who is it created and what are the economics of creating it? How is it distributed? How do you get this out there? And if you're entirely reliant on Instagram, for example, as your distribution platform, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you have to think about what are are you paying for traffic? How does this move about? How does it go? What does it mean to go viral in 2021 on Instagram, for example, or social platforms? And then we think about monetization, right? What are the opportunities in our monetization? Is this a subscription business? Is this something where it's going to monetize via advertising? Is some mix of freemium and for some sort of pro tier or something like that? So we really like to dig in and understand with the founders. And it's one area that we can be really helpful because I think a lot of the things that apply, what's interesting is starting to see some of the models from, say, gaming starting to be applied to media businesses. So we're investors in a couple of companies which are building on top of Twitch they're basically building games or media experiences on top of Twitch. And so we think about, okay, what does it mean to be distributed on Twitch? How are you finding new audiences? How are you finding new users, for example? How do you monetize on Twitch? What are the possibilities there and potentials there? What is the potential there? And so we really try to dig in and work with the founders to understand the opportunities on these platforms. And if we think the ceiling is going to be too low, if we think it's just, and we can be wrong, but if we think that just out the gate that this is a business which is going to struggle to get past $5 or $10 million a year in revenue, even if that path to $10 million is easier than it might be for somebody else, it's really hard to justify an investment.
No, it makes sense. And I actually wanted to zero in on now specifically your portfolio and move away from your investment thesis, but it's a blend of the two. You talked already about some of your investments that you made, Giphy, which was one of them. I know Anchor was another company that's in your portfolio as well. And you have a handful of fantastic companies, Rec Room, Hugging Face. There's a few that are impressive. Is there any companies that you really want to highlight that are currently maybe a recent investment that you'd like to highlight at all?
Yeah, we'll have one that we made, which is not announced yet, which I'm really excited about, which is using AI and machine learning to create games for kids. It's really interesting, really interesting. Like completely customized experiences. Each child has their own fully customized experience of playing the game. I haven't seen anything like it. I've actually seen one thing close to it, but it wasn't good. But this thing is great, and so I can't talk about that one yet. But really excited about. I'd say that one that I'm excited about is the one actually related to Twitch called Stream Captain. So Stream Captain they make games which Twitch streamers can play with their fans. And so they're pretty lightweight, casual games. They're relatively simple, Clash of Clans type games, which a lot of people might recognize from playing mobile games. But the idea is that you can play them with a streamer that you love on Twitch, and people are really passionate about the streamers that they follow. And what's been really interesting about it is they've focused on developing the relationship with the Twitch streamers. It's not as much about the end user. It's not trying to get the end users to build awareness. It's really about, can we get the Twitch streamers to play this game? And then the Twitch streamers make money from the in-game purchases that their fans make. So it's a way for them to monetize and support themselves. So you think about what's going on with the creator economy, the fact that so many people are finding these new platforms like Substack, Patreon to be able to support themselves and their work. What we're finding is that Stream Captain is a really great way for streamers. I think they have something like 6,000 streamers signed up already, and they just came out of beta in October. It's a way for them to have a connection with their fans, but also to make money. And I think that's one of the things that we're really interested in right now is what are the new ways that people can turn something that might have been a hobby 5 years ago into a business. And there's a lot of activity, a lot of interest around the creator economy right now, the passion economy, which some people call it. And I think it's great. I think as somebody who started as a blogger in 2001 and was told that I was crazy to start a blog as a business, that it was a fool's errand and that there was no money in it. I'm really encouraged when there are new ways and better ways for people to be able to support themselves and to throw themselves into the thing that they're passionate about. Now, I give the example of, we didn't invest in Substack. That is the kind of thing that we might have invested in. What we wouldn't have invested in is somebody's individual newsletter. I think that's a much tougher business. But sometimes newsletter businesses can grow and become bigger things, and we can be wrong about it. One of the things that we invested in, which has gone in a lot of interesting directions, is like Superplastic, for example. And Superplastic it's a virtual influencer, virtual characters business, and was really focused in the early first year or two on building up the audience on Instagram and on TikTok and getting a large number of followers there. And now but they've also had a physical business where they're selling selling stuff, selling toys and things like that. And then they've also gotten into the whole NFT selling virtual token type stuff on the blockchain. And so it's interesting to see like the potential of this stuff. If you create something that somebody is really passionate about and really cares about, you'll probably find a way to build a business around it. The question for us as venture investors is what is the scale of that business? It's not that it's not a good business. It has to be a big enough business for us to justify the investment.
Definitely makes sense. And it seems like you tend to lean towards more of the platform plays as a ways of either distributing content or enabling creators versus actual specific brands and, niche content.
Yeah, I'd say for the most part that has been the case. I'm not going to say we haven't had something here or there which like Shine might feel like it fits into sort of more of a media brand than in a platform per se. So it's not that we don't have exceptions, but I think that we're most interested in things that have some software based element, some technology at its core that's differentiating and driving the experience because we do think that that's one of the best ways to have to have defensibility in this category is to have something at the core in terms of software. Now that isn't always the case. I'd say Superplastic is not a software driven business. It's an IP and design driven business. So and I know it can be frustrating for founders when there's always some exception that they can point to in our portfolio that sort of undercuts the reason why we might be saying no to them. But the reality is that there is always a lot of nuance, and we do try to take things at a case by case basis. But if somebody's we had somebody come to us the other day and say, I have a web magazine, I'm making $5 million a year in ad revenue, and we passed. And we passed because I think that this might double or triple to 15 million. I think even they could do some stuff with events and with e-commerce and grow it into being a pretty decent business. I just really struggled to see where this went, how this grew into $100 million a year business. And I think that the reality is that subscriptions, it's hard to get there on subscriptions alone. There is getting enough distribution via social channels and Google is really tough to get there. And there isn't necessarily a lot of other great options in terms of building an audience to that level of scale. Not that it can't be done, but it just requires an enormous amount of investment. And I think it ends up happening more at the big media company where like Disney says, we want to start Disney Plus, right? Yeah, you can build a media subscription business and get to an enormous run rate really quickly. You just have to be able to prepare to spend a couple billion initial investment to get there and have a library of IP you're going to leverage. So it can be done. It's more the structures in which those things are enabled to be done. And it's why gaming has become one of the areas I'm most interested in is partly that starting to see gaming IP being licensed out to other forms of media like television and podcasts and movies, but also how games are absorbing a lot of our social experiences and becoming places where, via Twitch, again, people are watching people play games and there's a lot of it's a media like experience but also people using games as a way to create content via clips, posting this stuff on TikTok, posting this stuff on YouTube. And then also I think just the games themselves as a place where people are spending time and socializing. And it's hard to, if you are using Roblox or Rec Room or Minecraft to create something and then you make a video of that and share it with people, is that a media activity? Is that a gaming still? Like where these boundaries start to become very blurry. I love the blurriness. I love the blurred, lines of these new things. And it's why I've been spending a lot of time focusing on gaming as an area of investment.
It's definitely interesting that you mentioned that because it feels like it's hard to define media at all anymore because it blends so much with everything else now. And it's hard to see is media now a feature or is it the actual product? Is it a part of a service? It's a weird mix that it's hard to, it's interesting to see how it's going to evolve over time, especially the examples that you gave.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that is interesting is if you look at a lot of the surveys about time spent consuming media is that it is people are multitasking and consuming multiple forms of media at the same time. People might game and watch Netflix, or they're watching a movie and looking at TikTok at the same time, or using Instagram. It's like there's a lot of, I think, people doing multiple things at the same time. People will play a game while they're watching someone else play a game on Twitch. I'm not sure how healthy a lot of this can be in terms of people's attention and focus. But the point is that I think that whatever limit we thought we were going to hit in terms of our time spent on media, certainly this past year, we blew way past all of it. And people have spent a lot more time online on consuming media. And I think the thing that has been the lesson that I have learned over and over again is that people will find time for things that they think are great. if it's, and so it's not an issue of length. And people will listen to my favorite podcast is Hardcore History. It is an average episode is 3.5 hours long, and I can't wait until it comes out. A new one comes out because he posts 2 a year, but because it takes so long to make. But I love the depth. I love going in depth on that. And I think that same thing with TV shows, with movies, games. People will spend 60, 100 hours in a game that in exploring a world or a narrative that they care about. And I think that the flip side of that is that there's also the tweet TikTok side of things, where if you're not going to go super long in depth, then you do want quick, fast, move from one thing to another and be able to figure out what that next thing is. I think the hard place to be is in the middle, where you're trying to make everybody happy, trying to make, content that appeals to like a broad audience and that is also like a middle length. And people keep talking about this with podcasts. I actually don't think that the length of podcasts is a problem for most people. Again, I think that if you are interested in the topic, you will find time. And yeah, you can't listen to more than one podcast. I don't listen to more than one podcast at a time at the same time. But so there is some zero sum aspect to that. But I do think that the thing I found over and over again is that depth or length of experience is not a barrier. Quality is a barrier for these things. And so I'm really interested in people that are trying to do one or the other, right? Either you're trying to do something that isn't meant to be in depth, but is meant to be at a surface level, or going really deep and giving people like a really meaningful, high quality experience, one or the other.
Really interesting. I know, Peter, we only got a couple more minutes here. I just had two last questions.
Oh, sure.
For just generally, I would say media, and you could take this as a very broad media term that we're going with here. It seems like media in general is going through this extreme turbulence, meaning it's, especially recently, it's left a lot of people, I guess people generally, with a lot of questions, what's right or wrong about content, whether it's, where it's how it's distributed, how it's consumed, how it's made, especially in the social network realm. Yeah. How do you think this is going to be changing, how media companies or creators create any form of content or distribute it?
It's a broad question, but a good one. So I think that look, it's clearly the internet has been posed an existential challenge to traditional media companies. Habits changed. We don't consume a lot of linear broadcast TV anymore. Newspapers obviously have really struggled. And I think when you start to uncouple the relationships that people once had or the quasi-monopolies that businesses once had, we've seen that a lot of power ends up going to the platforms which are able to aggregate and make sense of the content that is out there for people. And that, by which I mean mainly Facebook and Google. And it's no surprise that the lion's share of internet ad revenue goes to those two companies because they have aggregated the lion's share of attention and a sort of flow of links and attention. So I think it's really challenging. And I think being realistic about where the opportunities are going to be, and things are changing. I think that we are going to see some regulatory changes. Obviously, what's going on in Australia is a watershed moment. I'm not sure it's going to. I think Facebook deciding to cut off all news businesses in Australia was actually, and I'm not a fan of Facebook per se. I closed my account over 10 years ago, but I do think it was the right decision on their part, given what's going on. And so I think that we will end up with probably smarter regulation where we find some sort of happy medium between balancing the public interests and the interests of the technology companies and the interests of publishers and news businesses. I think that where we're at is a disequilibrium right now, where clearly it is really difficult to, I would say, setting aside just as a venture investor, like I think that there's a public interest in there being a healthy news ecosystem. And I don't think that we have one right now. And I think that having a healthy news ecosystem will be, in the long run, good for society, but I think also good for those of us who invest and want there to be lots of viable paths for people to be able to support themselves, make money, build businesses here. I do feel encouraged that if you are a solo journalist, there are things like Substack and other platforms where you can go and find that passionate following and support yourself and make money. I think the question of what's the layer in between sort of that and the next step up is Facebook, right? Like that, there has to be, viable things in between. And seeing things like The Athletic and other places have tried to build, businesses there has been encouraging. I think it's obviously been challenging, but I think my sense is that 2 or 3 years from now, we'll have seen a next generation of sustainable media businesses come out. I don't know the scale of those businesses. I think that they will range from solopreneurs who run Substacks and other platforms that put out their content via subscriptions, all the way up to people figuring out, okay, how do I aggregate all this stuff together and build the generation of what we did at Weblogs Inc. 15, 20 years ago?
It's a lofty question and quite general, but I appreciate it. And I definitely think that it's a really unique insight about seeing how, you know, how things will play out long term. Thank you so much again, Peter, for taking so much time. I wanted to close out by just highlighting some of the unique aspects of Betaworks Ventures, because you guys are a venture fund that has a phenomenal team and a ridiculous amount of experience in this space. But you guys also, are you still doing the studio and the labs and the camps and all these other things?
So we're still doing the camps where we do acceleration, where companies will come in and work with us really closely for 3 months. We are not doing any more incubation right now. I'm not going to say that might not change, but at the moment we're not incubating any new businesses.
Very cool. Before we close out, Peter, is anything else that you wanted to mention to or share with the audience at all?
Just thank you for the time, and I really enjoyed the questions. And if anybody wants to reach me, it's roj.as is my personal website. Really easy to reach. I respond to all email, all sane email. And I'm happy to hear from anybody and chat more about this stuff. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about what we do at Betaworks and the media landscape more generally right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. I really appreciate your time. And again, why we had this conversation, we looked at a lot of different venture investors in the ecosystem. And Peter and Betaworks Ventures, the things that you guys are doing is really impressive. Your portfolio is phenomenal. How you can identify amazing opportunities at pre-seed and seed in the media industry, I think takes a tremendous amount of talent. And obviously you guys have a tremendous amount of background and experience in navigating the media industry. You yourself has 4 companies that you built to blogs that are also still big today.
It surprises me sometimes. So
it's fantastic. So I highly encourage any entrepreneur that's building anything in the consumer media or products that are digital, then definitely consider Betaworks Ventures as a firm to look towards for guidance and advice and potentially capital. So thanks again, Peter, for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
thank you.